welcome back. My name is Delta, my pronouns are Viva Vis, and you're listening to Outcast. In this episode, I'm going to talk about no longer identifying as trans. Before I actually get into the topic, I have a little disclaimer, announcement or something. You know how at the end of every episode I say that you can send me a voice message? Well, after over a year of saying that, I realized that I actually never activated the feature. So if you ever tried to send me a voice message and you weren't able to, I am so sorry. It should work now. If you want, you can send me a voice message again, and future voice messages from people who never thought about it will also now work. Anyway, let's get into the topic. So, since I've come out in 2017, I pretty much immediately since then identified as trans. I found the label, I read that it just means someone who doesn't identify as their assigned gender. So I like definitions, that was me, I used that label for a long time. I kind of actually stopped using it already back in January, I just haven't had the, time, I guess, to talk about. I don't know why I didn't, I wanted to talk about other stuff first, I guess. But now I'm talking about it. So the trans community has been really, really alienating to me as a genderqueer person who is a foreign, meaning completely separate from manhood and womanhood. I have talked about this before in the episode called Too Weird for Even the Weirdos. That goes more into genderqueer communities actually, but it is a wider issue, especially with trans communities, as trans communities have binary people in them, obviously, because binary trans men and women exist. So one reason I don't identify as trans anymore is because every time I say I'm trans and I say what kind of transition steps I am taking, people start calling me transmasculine or transfeminine, and just the way these terms are used in general really rubs me the wrong way. A lot of the ways people talk about transition is kind of in a bioessentialist way, which I will make an episode about, but people will call other people transmasculine or transfeminine based on what transition steps they take, which has led to a lot of people implicitly or even sometimes explicitly misgendering me, and I don't feel seen. Because regardless of what people say about trans-androgynous people, trans-neutral people, trans-xenon people, and all other people existing, the main two categories are transmasc and transfem. Because they're the closest to the binary. Of course they are the main categories. What? I'm sorry, I'm being sarcastic here, but I'm just fucking over it at this point. Also, again, regardless of what the trans community says about you don't need dysphoria to be trans or you don't need to medically transition to be trans, they are still so focused on maybe not so much dysphoria, but medical transition. It's alienating that it's portrayed as the default to have a HRT day, to even go on HRT. The other day I saw a post that was like, hey trans people, how long after you came out did you start HRT? Implying that every trans person at some point goes on HRT, which is blatantly untrue. It's all, oh yeah, you don't need to medically transition. There are people who don't want to medically transition, and we need to support them until it actually comes to including these people. What the fuck? And actually, since not really using the label trans anymore, I have felt more connected with my actual gender, actually, because before that I was always talking about oh yeah, transness. And now that I don't use it anymore, I call it genderqueerness or androgyny. And I feel more connected with my actual gender now, rather than just that I'm not cis or not my assigned gender. Why do I need to be defined by my assigned gender? Even if transness is decidedly the disconnect between your actual identity and your assigned gender, but it's still defining you because it's still in the definition. You're still referring back to something that happened so long ago. And that's another thing, trans people often talk about oh yeah, AFAB trans people, AMAP trans people, or especially with genderqueer people. And I don't like that. For a while I actually used the term isogender to describe not being cis or trans, but I actually decided, you know what, fuck gender modalities. I'm not using gender modalities. If you ask me if I'm cis or trans, I'm gonna say I'm a fucking fag dyke. Because that says more about my gender than trans cis does. I don't see why I need to refer back to my assigned gender to label myself as trans or cis or isogender or any other of the gender modalities that exist. they're very cool. I love that they exist, especially the ones that are not cis or trans, or that like kind of fuck with this binary of cis versus trans. Yeah, it's not a binary. Like, there's more options. You can be both or neither or partially one or the other. But I don't want to constantly refer back to this thing that happened like 23 and a bit years ago, when I can just refer to my current experience or my lived experience. Because my actual lived experience is defined by my identity and not really that much by what I was assigned at birth. Like, I'd rather just have people refer to my body if they need to. They really shouldn't generally, but if they need to refer to my body, I'd rather have them do that than refer to my gender assignment. Because firstly, stop doing that. Stop talking about the genitals I was born with. It's none of your business. And secondly, not everyone with the same assigned gender at birth is gonna have or have been born with the same anatomy anyway, because intersex people exist. So yeah, I'm kind of trying to not define myself for my assigned gender and not just do it in a different way. Hence, I am not trans or isogender. Also, I don't think I ever explained what a gender modality is. Well, obviously your gender is like man, woman, genderqueer, androgyne, xenogender, whatever. And the gender modality is basically how you experience your gender. Meaning like cis, trans, isogender, absgender, ipsogender. Yeah, there's quite a few labels. I don't even know them all, to be honest. And another reason I don't like trans anymore, because, as I said, it's so binary. Like, it's really, really, really binary and still so focused on medical stuff. And even now that I have been out for like 5 years, I'm realizing more of the history, because obviously, back in the olden days, transsexual was the term for binary trans people, and transgender was kind of created to be more inclusive. That was basically the term that people who wouldn't medically transition used, or people who were genderqueer used. They were transgender, they were not transsexual. So that already created a weird hierarchy, whatever. But then people, I guess, have decided the word transsexual isn't good, so everything shifted. So now transgender is the term for people who are mainly binary and medically transition. I mean, obviously there's a lot of people who are not that and do identify as trans. I mean, I identified as trans for like almost 5 years, so that's absolutely a thing that happens. But it literally just has shifted in the last, I don't even know how many years, because, as I said, I haven't been out for that long. But the way that transsexual used to be used, you know, like binary, medical, whatever, is kind of the way that transgender is now used. And funnily enough, now people are actually trying to bring transsexual back. You know, obviously True Scum had that to be like, oh yeah, like we're the real trans people, but now some people bring it back to be like, oh yeah, like sex actually is mutable, and to describe their desire for medical transition. And yeah, I don't know, people can use whatever the label they want. I personally don't vibe with that for myself, and honestly, I can't help but still see someone labeling themselves as transsexual as a big red flag, simply because of all the fucking True Scum that harassed me throughout the years for not being trans enough or whatever, and now can be like, well, fuck you, I'm actually not trans, but they will just call me cis anyway, even though I am not cis, I am just genderqueer, and a fact, like. But anyway, that's my experience and why I don't identify as trans anymore. Yeah, I guess it kind of similarly goes hand in hand with why I don't identify as non-binary anymore, which that was almost a year ago now, so I'm just ditching all the labels, aren't I? Anyway, that's it for this episode. If you like this episode or this entire podcast, why don't you share it on social media or with a friend? If you want to support me, considering I do all of this on my own, you can subscribe to my Patreon. The link for that is patreon.com/out_castpod. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm much more active on Twitter at out_castpod. That's for both. If you would like to be featured on the podcast, you can send me a voice message. The link for that will be in the description. If you would like to contact me via email, my email address is gndrqr98@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.